The American Revolutionary War was fought between the 13 American colonies and Great Britain from 1775 to 1783. So why did the colonies rebel against the mighty British Empire? How did they win their independence? And what was the cost of this freedom? Let's find out. The American Revolution was primarily caused by taxation without representation. The British government passed a series of laws in the 1760s and 70s that raised money from the American colonies, but the colonists had no voice in Parliament. This led to widespread protests and eventually armed rebellion. For example, the Stamp Act of 1765 required colonists to buy special stamps for every legal document they used. This was very unpopular, because it was seen as a tax on trade and commerce. The Townshend Acts of 1767 imposed duties on goods such as glass, tea, lead, and paper. These acts were also very controversial and led to the famous Boston Tea Party in 1773. On December, a group of colonists, disguised as Native Americans, boarded British ships in Boston Harbor and dumped 92,000 pounds of tea into the water. This was a protest against the Tea Act of 1773, which gave the British East India Company a monopoly on tea sales in the colonies. The company could now sell tea directly to colonists at low prices and undercut colonial merchants who had to buy their tea from Britain at a higher price. The British government responded to the Tea Party with more repressive measures, such as closing the port of Boston until the colonists paid for the destroyed tea. This was known as the Intolerable Acts in the colonies. As tensions grew, the colonial leaders met in secret to coordinate their resistance. One of the most important groups was the Continental Congress, which was formed in 1774. It consisted of delegates from 12 of the 13 colonies who met in Philadelphia to discuss their grievances with the British government. They issued a list of demands known as the Declaration of Rights and Grievances. When King George III rejected their demands, the Continental Congress met again in 1775 and voted to raise an army and navy to fight the British. The war began in April 1775 with the battles of Lexington and Concord. On April 19th, British troops marched from Boston to Concord to seize colonial weapons and ammunition. They were met by colonial militiamen at Lexington, where the first shots of the war were fired. Although the British won at Lexington, they were defeated at Concord and forced to retreat to Boston. This is how the first shots of the American Revolutionary War were fired, and we can visit these locations today. Throughout the war, there were many other major battles. Two of the most important battles took place at Saratoga in New York into 1777 and Yorktown in Virginia in 1781. The Battle of Saratoga was a turning point in the war because it convinced France to join the conflict. France had been neutral up to that point, but they were eager to weaken their rival, Britain. By providing supplies and military support to the colonies, France helped the Americans win several key battles and ultimately the war. The final battle of the Revolutionary War was the Battle of Yorktown, where British General Cornwallis surrendered his troops to American General George Washington on October 19, 1781. This effectively ended the war and led to peace negotiations. However, the fighting didn't end right away. It took a few more years for the British to evacuate their remaining forces from the southern colonies. But by all accounts, the war was over. During the war, the American colonies were represented by the Continental Army, which was led by General George Washington. George Washington was born in 1732 in Westmoreland County, Virginia. He was a surveyor by trade and served as a major general in the French and Indian War before the Revolutionary War. He was chosen to lead the Continental Army in 1775 because he was respected by all the colonies and had experience in military affairs. He was not a brilliant tactician, but he was an inspiring leader who kept the army together during hard times. His leadership skills were essential to the American victory. Another important figure in the war was Marquis de Lafayette, a French aristocrat who joined the Continental Army and became a major general. He was a close friend and advisor to George Washington and played an important role in winning the Battle of Yorktown. One of the most significant aspects of the American Revolution was the alliance between the colonies and France. As I mentioned earlier, France provided crucial military and financial aid to the Americans, which helped them win the war. However, France was not the only foreign power involved in the conflict. Spain and the Netherlands also provided aid to the colonies, although not as much as France. The British Empire had a huge advantage over the colonies in terms of military resources. They had a large standing army and navy, as well as more money and supplies. However, the British also made some mistakes that helped the colonies win. One of the most important was the decision to hire mercenaries to fight the Americans. Mercenaries are soldiers who fight for whoever pays them, and they are often not loyal to the side they are fighting for. This lack of loyalty led to many defections and desertions among the British troops, which weakened their forces. Another mistake was the failure to capture George Washington. If the British had killed or captured him, it's likely that the war would have turned out differently. However, Washington managed to escape several assassination attempts, and the British never got close enough to him to make a serious effort to capture him. The war had a devastating impact on Native Americans and Loyalists. Native Americans suffered greatly because they were caught in the middle of the conflict. Many tribes had alliances with both the British and the colonies, and they were often forced to choose sides. The war also led to the deaths of thousands of Native Americans from violence and disease. Loyalists were people who remained loyal to the British Crown during the war. They were often punished by the Patriots, and many of them had to flee their homes and become refugees. Some Loyalists went to Canada or Britain, while others stayed in the colonies and lived under British rule. Finally, let's talk about the outcome of the war and its legacy. The war ended with the Treaty of Paris in 1783. This treaty recognized the independence of the United States and defined its borders. The United States stretched from the Atlantic Ocean to the Mississippi River and from the Great Lakes to Florida. This vast territory would allow the United States to grow and develop for centuries to come. In conclusion, the American Revolutionary War was a complex and important event in world history. It was a time when the American colonies broke away from British rule and established their own government. The war was caused by a number of factors, including taxation without representation, the desire for self-government, and the growing sense of American identity. The war was fought between 1775 and 1783 and resulted in the victory of the colonies. The war had a profound impact on the course of history. It led to the creation of the United States and inspired other revolutions around the world. It also had a devastating impact on Native Americans and Loyalists. Despite the cost, the war was ultimately successful in creating a new nation based on the principles of liberty and democracy. I hope you enjoyed this video and learned something new. If you did, please like, subscribe, and share with your friends. And if you want to learn more about this topic or others, check out the links in the description below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.